This episode is brought to you by TherapyNotes, TherapyNotes.com. They are the leading electronic health record system for private practices in the mental health field. They're who I use in my practice, so be sure and check them out, TherapyNotes.com. This is the Practice of Therapy podcast with Gordon Brewer, helping you to navigate your private practice journey. This is session number 187 of the Practice of Therapy podcast. Hello, folks. I'm Gordon Brewer. Glad you've joined me. Glad you're with me on this journey and glad you're listening to the podcast and glad to have you with me. If this is your first time listening in, welcome. And if you're coming back for more, glad you're with me and hope you've subscribed to the podcast wherever you might be listening to it. So I'm looking forward to you hearing from my guest today, Salley Schmid. And Salley was a person I had done just a little consulting with. She had reached out to me and we talked a little bit about some of her goals and what she's got going on in her practice. And one of the things that I love about Salley is that she's really kind of embraced this whole diversifying your income idea and has a book that she's self-published. And so she's going to be talking about that. And so I'm glad for you to listen in on this conversation because I think that's something that is really interesting to people. And speaking of topics, one of the things that I'm going to put in the show notes here in the show notes and the show summary or whatever you want to call it is a link to a questionnaire. And what I'm interested in finding out is what topics would you like to hear about? Because that's something that I'm just really wanting to find from those of you that listen what is of interest to you and just making sure that I'm getting people that help meet your interests. So if you don't mind, take a moment to go to practiceoftherapy.com/PTO survey. And that'll be a link to a Google form that will just be a simple questionnaire, just a few questions. And that'll let me know just kind of what are you interested in? And what is it that you'd like to hear more of or less of or anything like that. And so, if you don't mind doing that, that would help me out and making sure that I'm putting the kind of content that you need for you in your practice or in your journey, and making sure it's relevant for you. So I appreciate you doing that for me. The other thing I wanted to let you know about are there's two upcoming free webinars that I'm real excited about. One is being done by my friend David Hall, but in conjunction with that, I've got Whitney Owens, who is from the Faith and Practice podcast, and her husband James. And David and Whitney and James have teamed up to put on a free webinar on 5 ways to use the Enneagram in private practice. I've gotten really interested, thanks to Whitney, over this past year in the Enneagram and just being able to use it. And I find that it's really useful in just talking with couples about their personality styles and that sort of thing. But anyway, I'm real excited about this upcoming webinar. And if you'll go to practiceoftherapy.com/webinars. I've set up a landing page there that will have links to all of the current webinars that I've got, I'm either promoting or have coming up. So you can go to that page and check it out. practiceoftherapy.com/webinars. And the other thing I wanted to let you know about was another webinar that I've got going that's coming up. And by the way, that other webinar, the Enneagram webinar, is going to be on July the 29th at 4 p.m. Eastern time. So it's a little later in the day. It's a Thursday. So, but if you register, like I know we do with most of the webinars that I know David does and that I do, be sure, and even if you can't attend, be sure and register so that you can get the replay. But I've got another free webinar coming up as well the next day, which is on July the 30th, and it is going to be on using Google Workspace as a practice platform. And so I'm looking forward to sharing that information with you. And that'll be at 1 p.m. Eastern Time. And you can get to that by going to practiceoftherapy.com/GWS webinar. And again, links for all of this will be in the show notes and show summary here, so you can get easy access to that. So before I get to my interview with Salley, also I'd like to invite you to go over and check out TherapyNotes, therapynotes.com, or you can go to practiceoftherapy.com/therapynotes and check them out. TherapyNotes is the leading electronic health record system for mental health providers in private practice. They're who I use in my practice, and they're absolutely one of the best platforms I've ever used. They have a patient portal that is second to none. They have telehealth built into their software so that you can do everything right in that platform. Also, they will, with Therapy Notes, you can do scheduling, and it sends out appointment reminders and all of that sort of thing. Also files electronic claims with insurance companies if you're insurance based, create super bills, all of those things. It's really an all-in-one platform for the clinical side of your practice. So be sure and check them out. therapynotes.com or practiceoftherapy.com/therapynotes, and be sure and use the promo code Gordon, GORDON, and that way you can get 2 months of their services for free. So it's a good way to try it out. Again, love Therapy Notes, so be sure and check them out. And so, without further ado, here's my conversation with Salley Schmid about diversifying your income. Well, hello, everyone, and welcome again to the podcast. And I'm so happy for you to get to know Salley Schmid. And Salley and I met. We did a little bit of consulting together, and I loved her story. And I said, okay, I've got to have Salley on the podcast. So, Salley, welcome to the podcast.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.
Yes, it's great to have you here. So as I start with everyone, why don't you tell folks a little bit about your journey and how you've landed where you've landed?
I kind of went about getting licensed in a backwards way. I lived in Colorado, and the process was flipped from what it was in Texas. So when I moved to Texas, everything I'd done counted for nothing. And I went into administration at a local residential facility and just kind of got plopped into the role of overseeing a group of staff doing training and implementing a trauma treatment model. And that started my journey into loving working in the field of trauma therapy. Uh-huh. And had my own kind of psychologically abusive relationship that ended up then in a healthy relationship. And my husband encouraged me to do my thing, to start my private practice. Mm-hmm. And so I've been doing this for 10 years now in private practice and love it, and have really defined my niche to be trauma counseling, interpersonal trauma, not environmental trauma.
Right. Well, I think your story sounds familiar in that I think a lot of us kind of started out in agency work and then just kind of moved into really wanting to do our own thing, so to speak. And tell folks again where you're located.
I am in Waco, Texas.
Yes. And so that is, not to get too far off the beaten path, but I think when I think of Waco, I think of Baylor University, and I also think of Joanna and Chip Gaines, and so that's
Yes.
probably people ask you about them all the time. So, but well, one of the things that I know that you have done, Salley, that I think would be really interesting to folks is you've really kind of created just kind of a whole other way of diversifying your income within your practice and put together some training materials and that sort of thing. That have been really meaningful to you. You want to tell folks about that?
I say that the pandemic had a lot of gifts that were hidden in it. Mm-hmm. And so one of those hidden gifts was me putting into book format a lot of the things I do that are visual processes in the office with clients. And I needed a way to get the work. And I'd already kind of had the idea of writing this process journal, but the pandemic forced me to get that thing done. Mm-hmm. And I'm so thankful for that. And my clients are responding very well to it. And I'm probably not at the point where I'm selling a lot online yet. It's just kind of it's a slow growing awareness, but it's a journal that's really designed to help people understand how they get emotionally dysregulated and give them some tools to get out of emotional dysregulation when they can't get on the therapist couch. Mm-hmm. It's not meant to be a replacement for therapy. It's a supplement to therapy. It's not one of those quick processes where 5 minutes to bliss, do this, that, and you're going to feel good. It's right. A deep dive into what's happening. So there's a few foundational pieces. One of them looks at kind of how we want and need to be seen and how we don't want to be seen by other people. And it connects very much to our value system. And then there's a process that looks at how we get stuck in patterns of people pleasing, peacekeeping, which includes some perfectionism kinds of stuff, which is usually about people pleasing, and how that puts that pattern, those patterns are really superfood for anxiety and depression, and some pathways out of that. I just added a process. So the most recent rendition has a piece in there on understanding the anatomy of trust from the work of Brene Brown. Mm-hmm. Her idea of the marble jar. And so if you're interested in that, that would be something to look up. Brene Brown details on. We don't have the time to deep dive into that.
Right.
And then a couple processes that there's several copies of. One is how to prepare, get in the right head heart space when you need to do something vulnerable to help. And then one is a grounding shame resilience process to help you when you are feeling dysregulated and you want to get into a better head heart space. Right. And so that can be, dysregulation from like, I've got just emotions and thoughts kind of spiraling in on replay to, feeling like super stuck in a situation, or like the extreme end of like I'm spiraling into a train wreck, and right. I need this to stop. And so when you're at that extreme end, you probably need help to fill out some of that work from a therapist. But it's a great resource for clients. Once they learn how to do it with their therapist, it's a great tool for them to get the help they need between sessions. And when they're done with their course of therapy, but they still have some, life throwing curveballs. So that's one book. And then I also created several years ago, and then didn't seem to figure out how to launch it until the pandemic. So that was another gift in the pandemic, is I got my art journal published on Kindle Direct Publishing as well. So both of those books are on Amazon. And the art journal is basically visual prompts. If you've ever seen a journal that has like a sentence stem that's a prompt for you to do your journal writing, instead these are visual prompts, and the journal user can do art or writing or a combination in the book. And there's 2 copies of every image. So I encourage people to do a painful rendition and a hopeful rendition of each image.
Wow. Yeah. So I'm curious, as you pulled these ideas together, and it sounds like it's something that you've been kind of working on for a while, what was that process like to make the decision to, okay, I'm going to write these things and I'm actually going to put them out there and sell them?
So the longest process was the art journal, because that I worked on for a couple of years to draw all of the images that go in it and then get them turned into digital images. And I tried to launch it on Kickstarter, and to create a book on artist quality paper of the volume that it was just stupid expensive. If I was going to make, a couple bucks on a book, it was. And I really quickly realized this is not going to be the avenue. I mean, I put it out there with an immediate failure response. That's not going to serve the vision for this or so I had that idea and started looking for some publishers, put some queries out there, got no reply, nothing. And so it was kind of discouraging. I don't have room for discouragement. So I just plugging along, and a friend of mine did coloring books and told me about Kindle Direct Publishing. And so I thought, okay, I just need to give up my hope of artist quality paper and get it out there on paper, and just in the material introducing the art journal, address that this is a quality of paper that accommodates these art supplies and not these art supplies.
Right.
And boom, it became real. It became a thing, and people have purchased it. And I also sell them out of my office. And then the other one, I had already been kind of creating Word documents of my in-office visual work. I have a roll of paper that rolls down on a wall, and we write all over it. And then I tear it off and send it home with them. So they go home with this big roll of paper. And so I had already begun creating versions of that I could just kind of email to somebody, like as homework, follow up, so that they would have the instructions that I was verbally giving them. And then when they go home and they look at what they did in the office, they could recapture what we had done by looking at the instructions and go, oh yeah, that's what this means. That's what that means.
Right.
And so when the pandemic hit, so that then led to this idea, like maybe someday I can turn this into a book and publish it. And then the pandemic hit, and I needed to get this work in people's hands. I mean, literally overnight, like probably all of us, I went from 100% in person to 100% online video counseling. And so it became a way for me to get that material in the hands of people. And it's easy to use KDP. I'm not trying to plug them, but it was easy. Like, it's a publish on demand. So if I wanted 10 copies of my book, it only cost me the cost of 10 copies instead of $1,500 or $4,000 to use a publisher. So it became really exciting, really fast to do that.
Right. Yeah. So how did you kind of learn the ins and outs of doing self-publishing? Was that something you had mentioned? A friend had really kind of said, well, you should look into self-publishing, but how did you go about just kind of learning what steps you need to take to do the self-publishing?
Well, I looked at some different self-publishing options, and the cost was just prohibitive. It was like, I don't have that to invest in. Then looking at, trying to get a publisher, queries weren't getting, and they just don't. I think the avenues to publish now are so different than when I, years and years ago, first kind of considered looking at publishing anything. And so KDP is super user friendly. Like, I didn't have to go about learning anything. It said, click here, do this, upload that. Voila, you have a book.
Wow.
Publish it.
Yeah. Well, we'll try to have links to them in the show summary here, because, I had looked at doing some self-publishing as well. And I remember KDP being an option for people. So, yeah. So when you made up your mind that you were going to do this, how was it that it came together for you? Because I think one of the things that happens for people is they think, they might have in the back of their mind, oh, someday I'd like to write a book. But then there's a process probably you go through where you think, wow, I could really do this. And this is how I can do this. So what was that like for you?
Well, my sister, Rebecca, is a English reading, writing teacher. And so she was my editor. And that's really important to have someone edit your work and look at it, because you know what you're saying when you're writing. But just because you know what you mean doesn't mean somebody else can look at it and know what you mean. And so it was really valuable. Like, there was this one piece that I was trying to duplicate how I do the visual process in the office, and trying to put that into something that could go in the book. And when she's like, when I looked at that section, I threw it across the room. I couldn't do it. It's terrible. She goes, I think you're trying to do something that can't be done in a book. I'm like, okay, that stings a bit, but that's good feedback. And I scrapped it and I rewrote it. And she's like, oh my God, this is so much better. It totally makes sense. And she goes, by the way, this is me. Really relate to it then. So having an editor was really important. And like with the art journal, I had somebody who knows how to digitize art. We do all that. I paid somebody to do my art in a digital format. I didn't know how to do that. So don't try to do everything yourself, because you can't know it all. And don't be afraid to rely on and invest a little bit of money in places where there's expertise that you don't have. That's much less of an investment than, self-publishing, where you have to commit to printing gazillions of books. But it ensures the quality of your product. And so I think that would be my recommendation. That was probably a really important part of my process. And then one of the really nice things about KDP was you can, you get it all set up, and then you can do some previews, and you can continue to tweak it to get it where you need it before you actually hit the publish button. So you're not, you're actually able to look at an electronic copy of how the pages would flip through. And then you have to pick what you want people to be able to look at. So you can, I had to decide how many pages, and I just decided to be really generous and give a lot of look through on the book, because I needed people to, the pages repeat, because I've got, 12 copies of this process, because it doesn't just happen once that you have a vulnerable thing to do. So I needed to give a deep dive look into the book, and you have the freedom to make that choice. So my risk there, somebody could try to cut and paste or copy or print screen. I'm like, if they want it that bad, that's fine, if it'll help them.
You're right. Yeah.
So I don't know if that exactly answers your question, but to me, that's what
right.
Like
Yeah. It's but obviously it was there was something that just kind of pulled you towards doing this. And how has all of this impacted your practice?
It's given me an off the couch income, and that can only grow. And that was important to me, because I want to extend my reach. I feel like what I have to offer is of value to people and can bring healing and transformation into the lives of people. And I just can't possibly be the one-on-one person for all of that. And not everybody wants the one-on-one or can afford it. And so it makes the healing work more accessible to people. So that was really important to me, and the heart-centered business. So that's at the forefront for me. And it's a business. I do have to make income, and I only have so much of me to go around. So how could I extend my reach? And that became the driving force for me to make that decision. Plus, I've always wanted to have, I don't remember as an adult at any point in my adult life where I didn't have kind of on my bucket list, I'm going to publish a book. I want to get a book out there. And I would like to write and do more. I don't have a big idea in my head right now for what's next, but I love being able to get resources that are valuable into the hands of people, and extending my reach. That's important to me. I kind of have a legacy mentality about the work I do, and I want something that will live past me.
Right. Yeah, and I think it's the thing you speak to, Salley, which I think is important for all of us kind of remember, or just do those things that you're passionate about. To me, it seems like you're really clear on your, as I like to call it, your why behind what you've
Absolutely.
created and that sort of thing. And so I think that's a good starting place for people with that. So if somebody has an idea like this, what would you say would be some steps they could take that would help them just kind of put it all into action?
A big motto for me was I don't have room for discouragement, because that just eats up energy I need to be creative. A step is better than no step was another one. Like, if I can get, a rough draft of the document, that's better than nothing. And then I can continue to tweak it little bit by bit. And I always remember time passes the same no matter what. So I may as well do something in that time that I'm going to feel good about having an end result with at some point, rather than delaying. So fortunately, I'm not much of a procrastinator. I do struggle with perfectionism, but I say I'm a recovering perfectionist who frequently relapses. But, recognizing that perfectionism just creates obstacles, and just to allow myself to create an imperfect product, and then I can continue to like it doesn't have to be perfect at the beginning. Like, I can work on it and edit it and refine it, and so do something on it and decide how often. Like, is it do one something every day? Is it do one something every week, and then stick with it? And find a way to hold yourself accountable to that, whether it be an accountability partner, or whether it be that you put it on your calendar and you dedicate time to doing it, or all of those things. You know yourself and what works for you. And for me, I'm very internally motivated. So it was easy for me. I didn't need an accountability partner. I just needed the vision for what I wanted. And I think as you start to produce something, it gains momentum because it gets exciting to see it come to life. What's really fun about KDP was that, like, I had an idea to add something to it, and I just went in and added it. So the first time I hit publish was a book that was missing the piece that's on there now. And that was part of me allowing myself to, it didn't have to be perfect.
Right. Yeah. And I think that's one of the things that I think a lot of us struggle with is that we deal with, number one, just a little bit of imposter syndrome, of just thinking that we're not qualified to do this thing that we have an idea about. But the other thing too is, there's several kind of cheesy quotes that come up for me, is it's better to do imperfect action than it is to do perfect procrastination, or something like that. Yeah. The other one is that there are a lot of times with projects like this, you're better off just to build the airplane as you fly it, just to get it out there, and then do the tweaks as you go along. And I think that's because, as you said, I just think about the different online courses I've put together, just to get something out there, even though it's not exactly what you wanted, creates that momentum. I mean, it's kind of like it helps hold yourself accountable to get it done.
Yeah. And, like I said, I had created some of these things that I could just give to a client, like as follow-up for homework too. And so I knew it was moving towards a book. So I would tell my clients, I would love your feedback. If there's something in this description that doesn't make sense, like, please let me know so that I can make it make sense. And I'll be happy to further explain anything on here, so that it's usable for you. And I also said, you do not have permission to copy this for anybody, because it's going into a book I'm publishing. So you have permission for your own solo use. So I was very clear about that whenever I handed out data copy of my work.
Yes. That's good. Yeah. And I think you're, the thing too, is I'm reminded of the book, another book by a guy by the name of Pat Flynn, is called Will It Fly? And I think the fact that you put this material out there to clients and to different people kind of help verify the idea for you, I would think. And that people were giving you feedback about the helpfulness of it, and that it would be something that they'd be willing to purchase down the road, kind of thing.
Yeah.
That's great.
And I've had a lot of, like, what's kind of been fun is new clients that look me up to, like, I liked your website, I bought your book, I want to work with you.
Yeah.
It's like, okay.
Yeah. It's just, again, a perk of having stuff out there. Yeah. So now remind me, Salley, do you have a group practice, or you're a solo practitioner?
I am a solo practitioner. I had a group practice for about 3.5 years, and I wanted to spend my energy in my sweet spot, and that is in my work with clients. So I just closed the group practice and went back to solo. That's
good for you, because I think one of the things, again, that speaks to is, I think everyone has to kind of find the right size for themselves. And being in solo practice doesn't mean that you're not growing and that you're not being successful as a practitioner. And I think that's kudos for you for being able to figure that out for yourself, which is great. Yeah. So that's great.
And it freed up the time I needed to continue to develop these book ideas too, which I wasn't spending my time in more intensive administrative tasks. I had the freedom and time to do these creative things.
Right. Well, this is fascinating stuff, Salley, and I want to be respectful of your time. Tell folks how they can get in touch with you and find out more about the books.
Okay, the best way is going to be on my website, and that my business name is Enrichment Training and Counseling Solutions. So it's enrichmenttcs.com. And you can link to the books on Amazon from the website. There's a contact page if you want to email me if you have other questions. One of the ideas I have, I'd love to create a workshop and teach therapists how to incorporate the use of my Sticky Emotions book, the Process Journal. And so that's kind of an idea that's in the works there. So I would like to equip therapists to use this as a tool for their own clients. Right. So if you're a therapist and you're like, how do I use your book? I'll chat with you.
Okay, awesome. And we'll be sure to have links in the show notes and the show summary so you can access this pretty easily. But I love this, Salley. I think you give a great example of ways in which therapists can diversify their income and really create some, for lack of a better way of putting it, which is what it is a product to offer to people that is outside that one-to-one kind of way of thinking of doing therapy and creating income for yourself. So that's awesome. So thanks, Salley. Thanks to Salley for joining me on the podcast. I'm really intrigued by practitioners that really think outside the box and really thinking about ways to provide services that are not just your traditional one-to-one kind of way of doing therapy, but also it provides a way to diversify your income. And so, again, thanks to Salley for joining me, and be sure and check out her things. Again, you'll find links to her website and her materials in the show notes here. And also, just as a reminder, be sure and check out the upcoming webinars that I've got. The one that is being done by David Hall, Whitney Owens, and her husband, James Owens, on the Enneagram. And I'm real excited about that. I'm signing up for sure. But they are going to be doing that on July the 29th at 4 p.m. Eastern Time. And if you'll go to practiceoftherapy.com/webinars, you can find links to all the upcoming webinars. And the other one that I wanted to mention is the one that I'm doing on the next day at 1 p.m. Eastern Time on July 30th. And that one is going to be on using Google Workspace as a practice platform, and just the ways that you can use it, and introduce you to all of that. And so be sure and check that out. Again, you can find links in the show notes and show summaries, but also you can go to that web page that I've set up, practiceoftherapy.com/webinars. Also, be sure and check out our sponsor for the podcast. Couldn't do it without them, TherapyNotes. And you can go to practiceoftherapy.com/TherapyNotes and be sure and use the coupon code or promo code, whatever you want to call it, Gordon, Gordon. And you can check them out for 2 months for free. They're really great platform. And I use it in conjunction with Google Workspace. So there you go. So thanks for joining me for the podcast. Be sure and take time to subscribe to the podcast wherever you might be listening to it, whether it be on Apple Podcasts or Stitcher or Spotify or Google Podcasts, wherever you listen to podcasts. Be sure and subscribe and leave us a rating and a review. That just helps other people find us by doing that. So, and also one other thing before we go is be sure and take that survey for me. Again, you can go to practiceoftherapy.com/PTO survey. So thanks for joining me. Hope you have a great rest of your week and weekend or whenever you might be listening to this. Take care, folks. You have been listening to the Practice of Therapy podcast with Gordon Brewer. Please visit us at practiceoftherapy.com for more information, resources, and tools to help you in starting, building, and growing your private practice. And if you haven't done so already, please sign up to receive the free private practice startup guide at practiceoftherapy.com. The information in this podcast is intended to be accurate and authoritative concerning the subject matter covered. It is given with the understanding that neither the hosts, guests, or producers are rendering legal, accounting, or clinical advice. If you need a professional, you should find the right person for that.